So Paul Counsel, he has a PhD in art because he was sculpting clay in new ways to express a message about the history of Australia. He developed the ability to create art that hadn't been created before, and he shared that. And one of the things that stuck with me from Paul is that when's a piece of artwork finished is a question that he often asks, and maybe he can give the answer to that today. But what he's doing and what he's done with helping people to overcome what is often one of the biggest challenges, which is how do I get to a point of abundance where I can actually do what I want to do with my life? That has become the art that Paul works on. And so, just in the way that he created unique art to express a message about Australian history, now the expression is helping people to have a different perspective on life, from which point they live differently from there forward. And I can say for myself that meeting Paul and going down this path has been one of the most rewarding things. It's the most impactful education that I've had in terms of someone transferring knowledge to me. I put it, equally with spending most of my 20s traveling the world and meeting people from all over the world. It's been equally impactful to go through this journey with Paul, reading the books, and more importantly, being live on the lectures and asking questions and interacting. Every time there's a chance to hear a presentation, there's always something new comes up. Yesterday, that concept of heightened human experiences and how someone asked, well, what does it feel like to live in financial abundance? And that answer about the way that Paul set up those experiences at his events, where there was nothing to do other than enjoy your life and enjoy the interactions with other people. I thought the way he put that into words, and sort of the way you can feel into what he shared there, those heightened human experiences, I think that's at the essence of what a lot of us are seeking. And for me, that's a big part of why Uncommon Success exists and why we're building these villages and why I'm encouraging these local connections as well as online connections. So I'll hand it over to Paul, and look forward to today's presentation and this being the start of the journey for many, working together with Paul going forward.
Great, and thanks for that, Keegan. And so I've just got a presentation. I think there's 72 or 3 slides or something like that. So what I'll do is I'll just go through the presentation without a break. And so the most important thing that you can do is get your pen and paper out and just take notes of anything that you actually want to ask a question about or would like me to elaborate on or something like that. Because if you just sit and watch, a whole bunch of thoughts will come to your head, but by the time you get to ask a question about it, those thoughts will tend to evaporate. So make sure that you make this time that we're going to share as impactful for you as you can possibly make it. The other thing too, and this is like a general overall sort of umbrella comment about Keegan's work with Uncommon Success. And so it really helps to think about, well, what does that actually mean? Well, it's fairly easy to look at what success might mean. And it might mean something different to you as an individual, but we can generally, all agree on or come to some sort of agreement on success. The most difficult thing will be to come to some sort of agreement on uncommon. Because the way that most people process the world is however they process their world. So they think about things in a certain way. Now, in order for you to progress that, you can no longer think about things in the way that you're currently thinking about them. So it's not what you think about, it's how you think about it. So one of the questions that I often get asked is how do I do something? And so that'll be the most common question that I've been asked over the last 25 years. Well, how do I do that? And what I'm going to encourage you to think about, or to try and integrate, and it won't come naturally, you've just got to work at it, is try, develop your best efforts to not use that line of questioning. Because if you use that line of questioning, you're only ever dealing within the conventional wisdom. And so this is about unconventional wisdom or uncommon wisdom. So we can't use the same language patterns to try and navigate that area as we do in the conventional wisdom way. So a more effective way of asking a question is, well, how do I think about this context, whatever it is for you, this situation, whatever it is for you? How can I actually think about this differently? So I had a bit of a chat with Joe yesterday, and he asked a how question or a what question, or what do I do, this or that, which is basically the conventional way. And if you were on that call, I didn't actually give him a what or a how in a straight answer, well, you should do this. I said, well, okay, here's how you can think about it differently. And then once you actually get access to how to think about things differently, you actually make better and more informed choices. So that's just a sort of an umbrella thing to say. Now, I'm just going to open up a presentation, and if all works well, you should be able to see a blue slide. So anybody can give me a thumbs up on that. And I just have to minimize the screen so I can see the slide. So today's presentation is essentially on how to think about the times that we're in and what they might look like over the next decade or so, and how does that apply to the idea of creating financial independence, or creating wealth, or creating financial freedom. And so we've got to start thinking about things in terms of cycles, and how cycles of change literally bring waves of opportunity. Now, if you're using conventional wisdom, you're not going to see those waves of opportunity. If you're using uncommon ways of thinking about things, then you are going to see those waves of opportunity. Now, once you can actually see them, the next important thing for you is to develop skills around taking advantage of those opportunities, and that's at some point we'll deal with in the future. So in this particular presentation, I'm going to concentrate really on three elements. And the first element is why an understanding of cycles is an extremely important facet to generating a lucrative future. However you want to describe that lucrative future, for me, it always includes getting access to more time and money so that I can get access to better quality experiences of this life that I'm living. So that's point number one. Point number two is why job income is no longer enough if you wish to experience anything to do with independence and freedom. So if you're relying on job income and you think you can do it through that, I want to help you change your thinking around that. And the third one is why a change in the way that you think about money, the way that you understand money, is absolutely critical to your future if you want that future to be based on some form of independence and some form of freedom. So if we just think about the economy, well, in any nation state, in any developed or developing country, basically the economy can only go in three directions. It basically can go up, it can go sideways, or it can go down. So they're the only three directions an economy can move in. And really, when you think about it, if they're the only three directions, then you might start to think about a question such as, well, how do you protect whatever you've generated now? And or how do you advance yourself in any of those three directions? Because there is only three directions. And when you think about it a little bit more deeply, there's only three outcomes. You either don't make whatever it is that you want to make, you don't make money, you actually make more money, you have more time and you have more experiences related to that, or in fact, you lose money. And so if there's only three directions and there's only three outcomes, you might start to think, well, why do most people experience so much difficulty around this thing called money, or around this thing called time, or around this thing called, having access to whatever it is that you desire? So if you think about the economy can only move in three ways, and there's only basically three outcomes, and then you say, well, okay, if I look around the world today, what do we see? Well, we see lots of chaos. We see political chaos around the world. We see economic chaos around the world. We see food chaos around the world. We see transport chaos around the world. Basically, wherever you look, you actually see chaos, which means that a cycle of change is happening, and the chaos is simply the breakdown from an old sort of system or systems to a yet to fully emerge new set of systems. But what you see today, more than you saw, a couple of years ago and even 5 years back, the speed of change is absolutely increasing, and you cannot escape what's coming. You can be advantaged by it, you can be disadvantaged by it, but there's pretty much no middle ground, simply because of the nature of those changes. And so when you think about cycles, literally everything cycles. And when you understand and follow cycles, and if you're really interested in learning more, then the book that I've got on here by Philip Anderson is an absolutely fantastic book in terms of sharing, why cycles happen, the whole history of cycles. This particular one is the cycle involved in real estate and banking. But when you understand and you follow cycles, your knowledge improves along with your ability to make better choices. And the choices that you want to be more impactful with is not like how you do something, it's what and when you might do something. Most people do things at the absolute worst possible time simply because they don't understand cycles. And that's not something that the mainstream is interested in teaching. It's not something that we learn at school. It's not something that we learn from our parents. But it is something that every wealthy person actually understands, is what to do, when to do it. So if we just look at a graph of a stock market, for example, you can see that there's all sorts of lines, and all of these lines might be, moving averages. And without making, things too technical, they're just lines plotted mathematically to find out what's actually happening over a period of time. It might be a 10-day period of time, it might be a 20-day period of time, it might be a 100-day period of time. But what you can see more than anything else is that sometimes it's going up, sometimes it's going down, sometimes it's really a sharp down, sometimes it's really a sharp up. And so everything cycles. And if this is a graph of the economy over certain different time periods, you might want to ask, well, what actually drives these cycles? Well, there's a couple of things. One thing that drives an economic cycle is, of course, economic growth. Another thing that drives an economic cycle or a business cycle or a real estate cycle, they're all slightly different, is inflation. And there's two types of inflation. One is push inflation and the other one is demand pull inflation. So cost push, demand pull. Now, I don't want to get too technical about this. I'm just sort of, giving you some language so that if you really want to, study it a bit later, you can. But cost push inflation is actually driven by the increases in the cost of wages and raw materials. So if wages are going up and the price of raw materials are going up, then prices, it's going to push prices up. So if you're aware that we're in a cost push inflationary environment, you can actually make choices about what prices will go up. And so if you can make better choices, then you know what part of the cycle you're in, then you can be more informed. The other one is demand pull inflation, and that's driven by shortages in supply, which leads to too many dollars chasing too few goods and services. And so, if you think about, the world today, we're definitely in a shortage of supply. And so we've got all of these, ships parked offshore and they can't unload. And so, it takes so many months to get a new car, or a part for a car can't come in, 6 months. So basically, there's lots and lots of dollars chasing too few services. And now, used cars are selling as much as new cars were, but simply because you can't get new cars. And so we were in that sort of a period now. So then you might say, well, okay, if everything cycles, what strategies do you need to learn in order to get you where you actually want to be? Now, I started my journey, and I didn't know anything about this, but I started my journey in 1994. Now, did I know anything about cycles? No. Did I know that we were going to basically come through a recessionary period there? Did I understand that? No. Did I know that the marketplace is going to drop into 1995? No. But I quickly learned that I could actually take advantage, because that was my learning. All of this I experienced, but here I was 40 years old in 1994, and that's when I started my journey. So I've experienced these cycles now. I've experienced this, experienced that, and now I'm up here experiencing this. Okay, so wherever you enter, then you will know that it cycles over and over and over again. So what happens when we're actually at a high point, and we're an extremely high point relative to 2008, 2094, 87, well, we get the opportunity to have a decrease. Now, is this going to happen this year? Is it going to happen next year? Is it going to happen the year after? Well, I'm not Nostradamus, but it is going to happen. It's part of the cyclic behavior. And so where's the bottom of that? Well, some people say it might bottom around about 26. Some people might say it'll bottom somewhere between 26 and 30. Now, if you think about maybe potentially that's 4 or 6 years, going down there. So can you afford to be in the wrong vehicle, in the wrong business, in the wrong anything, if the economic activity is actually collapsing? And then when it goes to a bottom, now how long is it going to take to actually get back to, well, where its high was? So we can say, basically that was a 3-year drop, and it didn't really get back here until about 2006. So, we've got 6 years, and then we got 2 years worth of growth. And then this is, of course, the GFC. So if you understand that, and if you start to understand cycles, then you can say, well, what would happen if growth is going sideways and inflation is in a high mode? Well, you might think about, well, it must be, something must work. And so you might think about commodities, metals and oils and food and agriculture and energy. So what are we experiencing today? Well, growth is almost non-existent, and inflation is just continuing to high. And so if you are taking advantage of the idea of cycles, then you might say, well, I might start really understanding a little bit more than I currently do about these sorts of things. What would happen if growth was high, but inflation was sideways? Well, economic growth, everybody loves economic growth. So they go out there and they do things like real estate business, entertainment, entrepreneurialism, technology, industrial metals, because everybody is building, and we're building more buildings and more high rise and all that sort of stuff. So there might be something there when you understand what part of the cycle you're in. What happens if growth is sideways and inflation is pretty much sideways? Well, pretty much the only thing that works in those sorts of environments are the precious metals. What would happen if growth is high and inflation is high? Well, increasing. We just come through a decade of that. And so you can have a look at land and industrial, commercial, commodities, all of those sorts of things, which give you, and all of the things that hang off those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily those particular vehicles themselves, but there's a lot of infrastructure around that supports them. And you might see an opportunity there as a business person, for example. So that's why it's really important to understand cycles. And we can look at 2,000 years worth of cycles. And so if you look at, the year one, you can see, look, for the most part, this yellow was India controlled most of the economic development. And we can see, the United States is almost, non-existent, France, in the United Kingdom. And then you come forward 1,000 years, it's still basically China and India. Through the 1800s, China really starts to take a greater share. India starts going down. But then sort of, this American thing starts to get a bit of a Guernsey. And now look where we are. China is expanding and America is actually contracting. So too is India and Japan and all of those European countries. So again, once you understand cycles, once you understand where the economic world is moving, once you can understand the chaos, once you can understand that there are ways of enjoying these opportunities, it doesn't matter what economic is going up or down. It's happening somewhere, and something you can take advantage of something as long as you do the research and as long as you do the skill development. But basically everything cycles. When you think about cycles, you can think about, it wasn't too long ago that the whole sort of economic model was based on hunter-gatherers. In fact, there was no real economy. It's about getting out there and getting food and surviving. And so, that was around about 100,000 years ago, up until about 50,000 years ago, even perhaps only 10,000 years ago. Then we sort of got into this ability to create surplus, where we started to grow, we started to domesticate animals. And so this other sort of, economic cycle took place, or living cycle took place, which was basically the settled agrarian. And, that still exists in lots of places around the world. Then there's sort of this urban industrialization came to be about 200 or 300 odd years ago, and that caused people to come off the land and get into massive towns so that they could supply the labor force for factories and industrial processes. But that was really about centralizing everything. And so we've been in that experience for the last 200 odd, 300 odd years. More recently, we've had this sort of technological revolution, which is driving the opposite of centralization. It's driving decentralization. You can think about, the amount of technological advancement with things like the internet and stuff like that. And then, things like, the last 2 years of this wellness challenge that went around the world, and then people had to stay home and then they had to work from home. And this technology allowed people to not actually have to go to the modern day factory, which is basically, the office building. So it's driving decentralization. And so there's lots of advantages, there's lots of opportunities in this thing called decentralization. And now we're quickly moving into this knowledge revolution, which is really, it's the age of the entrepreneur. And so you've got to think about, is working in an urban, industrialized, centralized job enough for you to get the freedoms that you want to experience? And what I mean by that is, if it doesn't matter what, whether you're self-employed or anything like that, whether you work, from house to house or anything like that, it's the idea of just working on wages. When you just work on wages, it's just not enough. You've really got to get into, this new cycle, which is that sort of entrepreneurial knowledge revolution. You think about all the ways of wealth, there wasn't too long ago where wealth was, well, okay, I can just go and get a ship and I can just, train up a whole bunch of people, and, I can just go and shoot a few merchants out of the water and basically steal all their wares, and I'll go and bury my pieces of eight somewhere. So the whole idea of piratism. And of course, we've still got modern pirates today. That I'm not recommending this, but it basically was strategies for other people. The times are changing, and you've really got to start thinking about the increasing rates of change. And so we really are being sucked into a tsunami of change that's really replacing any idea of wealth accumulation that previous generations had exposure to. And so if those old ways are being replaced, then conventional wisdom isn't going to be able to take you to the place that you want. conventional wisdom can't take you to the experiences that you want. Conventional wisdom can't take you to the heightened experiences as a human being, because by definition, convention is what is shared with everybody. And so it's the uncommon nature of success that you really want to concentrate on. So you really need to get to the uncommon ways of thinking about how you might develop the future lifestyle going forward. And of course, it's going to take skill. So we're not negating skills here. So the unprecedented speed of change means that you must quickly adapt. And the things that you've got to adapt most quickly is the way that you think about what it is that you think about. Okay, so if you think about poor people think about money, so do rich people think about money. So do middle income people think about money. So we're all thinking about money, but the way that rich people think about it, the way that poor people think about it, the way that middle income earners think about it is completely different. Okay, and then of course their thinking drives their behavior. So lots of people have behavior around money. Rich people have behavior around money. Independent people, financially free people have their behaviors around money. So if you want more of that access to that independence and freedom, there's two things you've got to change. A, the way that you think about things, because if that doesn't change, you can't actually make more informed choices. And then you've got to behave differently than you are now with this thing called money. Now, the birth of this tsunami of change took place during the late 50s. It was really the start of the space race. And the start of the space race was 1957, when Sputnik was basically launched into space. It became the first artificial intelligence system to literally orbit the Earth. And probably a lot of you people weren't born around that time, but fortunately I was. And I can remember it very, very well. So artificial intelligence literally accelerated the development of knowledge-based wealth. And that was knowledge-based wealth founded on these things called system theory and information science and software development and project management, new science, mathematics, internet, new technology. Okay, but even just saying those words, which you may not have heard before, that's okay. But just even saying them, it really connotes the idea of change. And so if change is happening rapidly and we know where we're heading, you now need to understand that the conventional ways don't work anymore. The non-conventional ways, which will eventually become mainstream, that's where you want to be. You want to be on the beginning of basically the F-curve, the S-curve, not the top of the S-curve. And if you don't know what the S-curve is things start off really, really slowly, then it hits a critical mass, and then accelerated growth happens, and then it gets to around about 90% takeoff, and then it really slows down a bit, slows down again. So up the top there is like the end of the S-curve. So new blockchain technologies, which has really only been around for, well, the concept was born in 2009. Most people didn't know it. Like gamers were kind of sort of using these tokens called Bitcoin to, swap with each other. The first actual purchase of anything made by Bitcoin was 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. So if you want to work it out at today's price, that was a pretty expensive pair of pizzas. But basically, if you think about blockchain not as cryptocurrency or anything like that, if you think about the development in technology or blockchain technology, now, a little bit later, I'll get in and talk about how some of these technologies open up opportunities for us. But you've got to start thinking about this in the way that is counterintuitive to the way that most people are out there flogging this idea on the internet. But basically, it's unlocking countless opportunities and new life trajectories for individuals, business, along with cultural, social, and educational entrepreneurs. So here's some sort of, hinting at where you might start thinking. If it's new life trajectories, if it's new opportunities for individuals, for businesses, along with cultural, social, and educational entrepreneurs. So we might have to develop a skill around those things that we don't actually have a skill around yet. So we're rapidly shifting from this mass production industrialized process to this high technology-based entrepreneurialism. And literally, it's a change from labor and service economies to new brain-driven economies. And so the more you get into that brain, the more you develop that brain, the better you are at getting advantage from the opportunities that those economies are going to experience. Now, the way that I look at things, you know, with this rapid amount of change, this rapid amount of chaos, you know, when I look back, I haven't heard anybody else say this, but it really has come to my mind that the baby boomers are going to be the last generation to have had the potential for wage-driven financial freedom, because they, you know, they experience lots and lots of growth with everything to do with, you know, an enormous population, which was why the baby boomers were the biggest, you know, generation of anything that had come before it. But basically, you could afford to have one person at a job, one person stay home to look after the house and the children. And, you know, there was interest on savings and all of those sorts of things. And basically, you could actually buy and pay off a house and all of that sort of stuff, and live, if you put your mind to it. Not every baby boomer did, of course. But it's the last generation to have the potential, and I'm sort of putting air quotes around this word for potential, because not everybody realized or took that potential. But for me, it's no longer the case. So something else has to happen. So you've got to sit and ask yourself, well, you know, where's your thinking currently locating you in terms of the outcomes that you say are important for you and that you say that you want? And then you can sort of ask that question economically. You know, are you still sort of locked into this time and labor pursuit of money? Or are you actually moving into this new exciting area of brain-driven entrepreneurialism? Are you a serious student of blockchain and future technology? And, you know, becoming a serious student of the technology of blockchain, forget about the crypto space. Every person is out there just, you know, flogging it to the cows come home, but forget about that sort of crypto thing and concentrate on the future development of technology. For example, back in 2000, we had, you know, these new startup companies, you know, Microsoft, Intel, Amazon, Apple. But see, that was such a foreign concept to most people at the time. Most people couldn't even make sense of them. You know, how come this company could be worth, you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars when it wasn't even making a profit? I mean, how was that possible, you know? But it wasn't until 15, 20 odd years later that where we are now, you can now see how those business models have paid off in trillions of dollars. So with blockchain, we can't actually see the future. We can see, you know, really clever people can see possibilities, but we're only at the beginning of that. We're only at the emergence of that change. So rather than, you know, try and do what's going to go up and what's going to go down and what might do it, you know, a moonshot, rather than concentrate on that, concentrate on the development of the possibilities in the technology itself. American entrepreneur, investor, and educator Mark Moss, he warns of three rapidly converging revolutionary cycles. And so these, again, everything changes. He says, look, currently there's a 250-year political social cycle that's coming to an end. Currently, there's an 80-year financial cycle that's coming to an end. And currently, a 50-year technological cycle based on previous technologies now coming to an end. And they're all rapidly converging on each other. So they're going to impact us in the coming time. On one hand, it's going to impact a high amount of chaos. On the other hand, it's going to be really exciting for those people that can actually understand the changes and take advantage of them. So the more they converge, the more they revolutionize what we do as human beings. The more they revolutionize what we do with this idea of wealth and freedom and what it actually means to individuals. So if we look at the 250-year political social revolution cycle, it's actually moving us from this centralized control in work and living environments. We can now use technology and work from remote locations. We can actually use this this move from centralized things to decentralized freedom to work in not only spaces away in capital cities, we can actually use it to work from different companies. And in fact, the office that I'm sitting in now, given my internet challenges over at my house, is so this is deep south Tasmania, and yet the office that I'm working in, it belongs to a lady who actually does work for the UK. So again, complete flexibility. So it gives us complete flexibility over where we live, over what we do, and it gives us complete flexibility over the ways that income and lifestyles can be generated and experienced. The 80-year financial cycle is revolutionizing changes in the system of central banks and fiat currencies. And you've got to have a really good understanding of what that actually means for you, and an understanding of how the value of fiat currencies is decreasing rapidly. And again, that's a big part of another presentation, should I get the opportunity to present it. But the 50-year technological cycle is literally revolutionizing the course of humanity itself, because it's driving financial markets in new directions. And it's those new directions that will have the potential to actually improve the lifestyles of individuals. Even though we've got to go through a rough patch, on the other side of that rough patch is improvement, if you are taking advantage of it. It's certainly not going to be improvement if you're not going to take advantage of the different ways to think about what it is that you think about. So again, it's not what you think about, it's how you think about it. Alvin Toffler and Heidi Toffler, they were great futurists. I just love their work. But basically, they saw these changes coming from a long way back. They said the 21st century wealth is not just about money, and it cannot be understood in terms of industrial age economics. Okay, so here's an alert. It's not just about money, and it's not just about the way that the economies worked in times gone by. So that's just an alert that, well, hang on, I've got to have some more understanding of what that, I might want to read that book, Revolutionary Wealth. It was a fantastic book, and certainly an eye-opener for me. So future wealth is based on knowledge and its application, rather than consumable resources. Now, knowledge wealth is available to anybody who wants it. And it's absolutely, completely inexhaustible, other than consumable resources. So your job moving forward as an uncommon success person is to actually get new knowledge and then learn how to apply that knowledge profitably. Again, easy to say, a little bit more difficult to develop the skills, because you need time to develop those sorts of skills. So Heidi and Alvin Toffler offered powerful new knowledge tools for thinking about. So it's not what you think about, it's how you think about what you think about. For thinking about and preparing for a new future in a world of high-speed change and the revolution in wealth that's actually taking place. But Alvin Toffler, he also had a warning. And he wrote this in his book, Future Shock, in 1970. And he wrote, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And there's the crux of everything. Your ability to learn, we've all got that. Your ability to relearn, we all have the potential for that. But it's that middle one, unlearning what you thought, unlearning what you've come to believe in. Because if you can't unlearn it, then relearning is going to be a bit of a challenge. So more than ever before, as you prepare for your future new lifestyle, your ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn is critical in determining what that future looks like and what that future feels like for you. So it's great to have the discussion yesterday on what does it actually feel like. Again, it's really hard to put into words what feelings are but I can get people to experience those feelings by setting up the environment where it can actually happen. Now, needless to say, it goes without saying that your inability to learn, unlearn, and relearn is literally going to condemn you to a future lifestyle experiences that perhaps you would prefer not to experience, or perhaps you would prefer to avoid in some way, shape, or time. So as decentralization increases, and that's the environment that we're in now, and that's what the chaos is creating, or part of the chaos is the creation of that decentralization, or the push against centralization, the push back, the speed of change increases. Now, for the first time ever, decentralization has created digital scarcity. It's part of the decentralization in technology. It's created an explosion of information and knowledge that will lead to things that we haven't even dreamed about yet. Excuse me. So the push towards a decentralized world literally begins with a breakdown in trust. And so everywhere around the world, you can see there's a breakdown of trust in governments, there's a breakdown of trust in institutions, there's a breakdown of trust in political agendas, there's a breakdown of trust in fiat currencies, which is why people are going to trying to protect the value of their fiat currencies with the precious metals. There's a breakdown of trust in big pharma, for example. So all of those trust elements within all of these institutions and systems is now at an all-time low. That's why you've got all sorts of revolutions and all sorts of unrest around the place. And the more that this happens, the more you need to be able to back yourself. So you are the person that is going to be able to take advantage. You can't rely on anybody else. You can rely on people to teach you by all means, but for somebody else to do it for you, those days are gone. So you've got to grow your skills in order to experience freedom. And so your ability to back yourself with new knowledge and skills, because knowledge alone doesn't mean to say that it's skilled. So knowledge is easier to gain than skills are. So skills just take more time and more determination. But it's basically critical to the freedoms that are now being offered through this whole process of decentralized financial systems, decentralized living, decentralized work environments. It's also critical in choosing your future income and lifestyle adventures. And so again, the underlying word here is it's critical in choosing. If you're not learning, you're not actually choosing. You're kind of sort of just doing things unconsciously, which means that things are being chosen for you without your recognition of them. So recent decades of unlimited money printing, just in the past, I think 10 years, I think there's been something like $8 or $9 trillion printed. I mean, that's more money printed in the last sort of 10 years than the whole world has ever experienced in the whole history of this thing called money. And then we've got rising inflation on top of that, and we've got escalating prices on top of that. But basically, when you print more money, it devalues the purchasing power of the money that you already have. So rising inflation, escalating prices are rapidly decreasing the purchasing power of the money that you earn, save, or invest. So we can't think about earn, save anymore. So as investors and entrepreneurs, you need to find new sources of real value. Otherwise, you get destroyed by the destruction of purchasing power of fiat currencies. Multinational financial service corporation Fidelity recently stated that investors need to consider Bitcoin separately, underlined separately from other digital assets. No other digital asset is likely to improve upon Bitcoin as a monetary good. Okay? No other digital asset. So if you're chasing, speculation, that's just gambling. because Bitcoin is the most, relative to the other digital assets, secure, decentralized, sound digital money, and improvement will only necessarily face trade-offs. So if other coins or other tokens are trying to improve on something, they've got to sacrifice something else, which is what it's saying. So, here is a real sort of big backing for, this digital asset. And again, if you think about it more as technology rather than as a monetary good, it also acts as a monetary good, but I'm suggesting that you might think about it in other ways than that. Digital assets are creating financial revolutions now, but future possibilities for youth growth innovations in digital assets such as Bitcoin are currently unknowable. Now, if you think about that, you don't have to go back too far before basically the discovery of natural gas and oil. So prior to that, lighting was generally, candles or some other combustible. But when oil and gas came along, all it really did was replace the lighting systems. So basically, the use of oil replaced the candle. So we didn't know about all of the other things that we could do with oil. We didn't know that we could turn it into petrol. We didn't know that we could turn it into plastics. We didn't know that we could turn it into, all the things that you use oil now for. It's the same with natural gas. We didn't know that you could actually, freeze it and liquefy it and all of those sorts of things. So it's like, when they invented steel, all it did was enable us to build taller buildings. We didn't know that we could take a steel girder and lay it, horizontally in the ground and put a big steam train on it and run from one end of the country to the other. So that was an unknowable growth until we started to really see, oh, gee, if we could do that, what happens if we lay it horizontally? Can we stick a train on it? And can we? And so it opened up all of these things. We didn't know that you could actually take steel and bend it into a space shuttle and send it up into space. They weren't knowable at the time. But that's why I'm saying, well, it's the same thing with the digital revolution that we experience. We don't know. We just know that there are things that are going to be developed we haven't even thought about today. So you've got to think about these things in terms of future technological growth, not just in the ups and downs of the crypto mania, so to speak. Moss believes that the true innovation of Bitcoin is actually decentralization. Now, when you understand that, and we've got to investigate that a little bit more, but decentralization, he says, is not true of any other, of approximately the other 19,000 crypto coins and tokens. And so he says it's all about the ledger, and nobody controls the ledger in Bitcoin. So if they don't control the ledger, if nobody controls the ledger, then they can't milk it, they can't inflate it, they can't sell your asset, which is what's actually happening now with inflation and money printing and the destruction of purchasing power. So the need for real sources of value create a commodity super cycle because you literally can't print land. You can print money till the cows coming home, and that's what the central bankers are doing. But you can't literally print land. You can't print oil. You can't print energy or food production, precious metals, or agriculture. So it gives you a hint at some of these things that might actually do advantage or have advantage or have opportunity over the next decade or so. Those are the assets will be future winners, and knowledge is the greatest asset of all. New knowledge is the greatest asset. And the thing about new knowledge is that it's non-rival. Now, what I mean by that, there's a little video that's just going to start playing in a minute, and that's those little two people boxing here. An asset can be either rival or non-rival. A rival asset means that if I own it, I exclude your ownership of it. So if I own the house, you can't simultaneously own the house. But knowledge is non-rival. In other words, I can actually give you my knowledge and you can go out and make a fortune out of it, but it doesn't exclude my ability to make a fortune out of it. And so what we have now is a movement from rival to non-rival. And basically, non-rival goods and services are services that can be consumed over and over again without the supply being affected by the rate of consumption. Okay, and that's really important. So my consumption of information doesn't exclude your consumption of information. I can read 1,000 books, you can read the same 1,000 books, you can go and apply it, I can go and apply it. So your knowledge, your consumption of it doesn't exclude mine, and vice versa. So non-rival means that when individuals or groups consume something, the supply of that something that's left over for other people to consume remains unchanged. 1 million people can consume the same books and the same information and gain advantage out of that. Now, with decentralized technology, you can multiply your knowledge and skills 1 million times, and its supply can be consumed 1 million times without depleting it. And this is something that I really want you to understand. It's difficult to multiply a non-digital asset. So think about that. Knowledge can be multiplied millions of times, and it doesn't affect its supply. So the fastest way to create wealth during these emerging economic conditions is literally to teach people something that is valuable to them. The fastest million I ever made took 9 hours, okay? And I'm not saying this to brag or anything like that, but the fastest $1 million I ever made took 9 hours, and it was based on 3 3-hour presentations of knowledge. So if you think about that, if you understand, if you've got the knowledge and you share that knowledge, then that'll be your fastest way to wealth. Now, obviously, I had the skills when I did that, but it still represents the fastest million I ever made. Now, let me ask you this question. So here I am, and I'm giving you some knowledge via this presentation, and via the thoughts, and then via the question and answers that we'll actually have in the end there. Now, am I going to ask you, is the knowledge that I'm giving you now worth $1? And if you say, no, it's not worth $1, well, fine, my apologies. And if you say, yeah, look, there's some valuable things there, it's making me start to think about something different. Would you pay $1 for the knowledge that I'm giving you now? And if the answer is yes, then if you'd pay $1, then somebody else would pay $1. So what about this idea? How about you take the knowledge that I'm giving you now and sell it for $1 1 million times? That'll be the fastest way for you to make million. Now, well, why would you do that? I'm absolutely giving you full permission. You can take the knowledge that I'm sharing. You might not be able to take this exact presentation, but you can put it together any which way you want and sell it for $1. And if you sell it 1 million times to 1 million people because it's valuable to them, then you're going to make millions. Now, the only reason why you couldn't do that at this time is because maybe you just don't have the skills to reach 1 million people. Or maybe you don't even have the skills to reach 500,000 people. Or maybe you don't have the skills to reach 100,000 people. But you get the drift. But the thing about these skills is that they can be learned and they can be taught. That's what I've taught people in, you might have heard Keegan talk about EMC. So they can be learned, they can be taught. Okay, so if they can be learned and they can be taught, well, that might be your port of call. Now, the only reason why you wouldn't do it is because maybe there's something in your mind or in the way that you think about what it is that you think about, or in your particular model of the world that actually won't let you do it. Maybe there's something in your mind that's kind of sort of resisting the idea of taking something that I'm freely giving you and developing it for your own economic growth. So it's either you can't, or you can learn, or you won't. Well, we can work on both aspects, can't we? So here you go. That's an idea. Now, both challenges can be solved, and all it takes is time, learning, and skill development. And if you're up for that, you're certainly in the right place, because it's basically a win-win situation. People will benefit because you've actually taught them, or you've shared something of value for them. And you will benefit because you can actually be benefited by the proceeds of your teaching. And say what, you only reach 100,000 people at $1. So what, if there's 50,000 people at $1, well, it's better than working all year for a similar amount of income. So you've just got to become a serious student of putting it into your own language, and then how to actually communicate that language to 100,000 people, 500,000 people, 1 million people. Because it's not the cost that's important, it's the reach. So the more money you make, the more real goods and services, such as food, land, wellness, for example, that you can consume, and the more comfortable your lifestyle becomes, the higher experiences of anything to do with lifestyle, such as, wellness, such as relationships, such as, physical comfort, environmental comfort, transport comfort, all of those sorts of things. The higher the experiences of lifestyle that you can access. And you don't need lots and lots of, really status things around you. I personally don't go into that at all, but my golly gosh, am I building a community of people and an environment and, based on nature and real connection. So real wealth for me is time abundance, a time abundant, comfortable lifestyle of independent choice. So if you want to take that definition and then sort of think about it for a while, maybe there's something there that will resonate with you. Now, how do we get that time abundance? How do we actually get that comfortable lifestyle? How do we get that more of that independent choice? Well, money literally gives you the power to make those choices. So real wealth is your ability to buy a lifestyle offering goods and services. It's your ability to purchase health, food, land, wealth, shelter, wellness, security, independence, without really having to work for it, while doing less work, because you're actually busy doing things that really, really interest you, rather than those sort of industrialized processes of selling your time and labor for money. Now, if you think about traditional assets, if they only rise in value relative to the impacts of inflation and money printing, and again, I've got a full presentation that will teach you, and maybe some of you have already seen that presentation on the 30-day challenge. But basically, you're really going to understand whether values are really increasing or just the purchasing power of dollars is decreasing. Okay? So if inflation makes you think that values are increasing, but in actual fact, inflation and money printing, you're no better off, because unless you actually sell your $1 million house and move to an emerging country, an emerging economy, if you sell $1 million house and you want to live in the same suburb, the thing you're going to buy is another $1 million house. So you actually haven't made anything. You kind of sort of, just kept up with the rate of inflation. But your purchasing power doesn't increase, it actually decreases. And so we're going to start thinking about increasing your purchasing power, or at least protecting the purchasing power of your dollar you already earn. Now, if you think about this, okay, so inflation literally means the loss of purchasing power. And so here we can see from the 1940s, the inflation rate, and this is US city average, it's been increasing since the 40s, well, post-war. And so during the 1980s, it starts to rocket up a bit. And the interesting thing about this is look at here, that was the global financial crisis that we experienced in 2007/8. And it's such a it was such a big impact back then, but in the big scheme of things, it was such a minuscule impact. And sure, we went into a bit of a recession. These grey lines are the recessionary lines, but look at where we are now, like huge amounts. So you've got to think about inflation. Now, inflation causes the price of things like petrol and real estate and new and used cars and timber and food to increase by 20, 30 or 40%. It doesn't mean that they've become more valuable. The value is the same. And again, this might be a difficult thing to communicate in its first iteration of it. So I might have to, chat about that a little bit more. But it doesn't mean that their value has increased, because they're still the same thing, What it does mean is that the purchasing power of their currencies has decreased. And now you need more of it to buy that same thing that you could have bought with fewer dollars a year or two earlier. And it's really important that you understand purchasing power. Inflation and money printing destroy purchasing power. It doesn't increase value. So we're going to start thinking about value in a different way. So to work towards a lifestyle of more freedom and more choice, you literally have to do two things. The first thing is to protect the purchasing power of the money that you already make. And then the second task is now, once you've got it protected, then to multiply the purchasing power of the money that you already make. Because if you just stay with conventional wisdom, there's no way you can actually have your freedom and independence. Now you can achieve both through well thought out learning. You can basically get that new learning and apply it to new strategies. And here's the thing I want to really impress upon you. If you act without learning, you actually put your money, your time, your belongings, your labor, along with your potential future lifestyle, you actually put it at risk. And anything that you do with that is literally just gambling. And so number one key is learn before decision. So Toffler noted, if you don't have a strategy, you're part of somebody else's strategy. So what does that mean? Well, if you haven't deliberately and consciously created the results that you're getting now, those results are being and have been created for you. And the saddest thing for me is that most people live their lives unconsciously, and they end up in this situation that they don't know how to get out of because they didn't consciously design the way in, so they can't consciously design their way out. And so they're always subject by those social engineering forces. So if you act without learning, you'll follow outdated conventional models and ideas. And if you do what everybody else is doing, you're not investing, and you're certainly not being smart. What you are is basically a gambler, or you're gambling on your future. And that's not something that you want to even remotely entertain. So learning, knowledge, and experience increases probabilities of success, while acting through hunches, market hype, impatience increases probabilities of loss through this thing called gambling, through this thing called randomness, and through this thing called chance. You don't want to gamble on your future through random or chance or anything like that. You want to do it with knowledge and skills. So the three converging revolutionary cycles means that old ideas of wealth must change. Savings or inflation-driven growth or job incomes in devaluing currencies cannot fund an abundant lifestyle of choice. Something else, you need to get something else has to happen. You need to develop serious skills in something else, okay? So you can't just rely on your job income, which is basically being generated in devaluing purchasing power. Being a specialist at a job is no longer enough. In order to have freedom and independence, your ability to invest in things like businesses or commodities or entrepreneurial pursuits, your ability to do that, your skill to do that must be equal to your whatever your specialist skill is now. So if you're a builder, if you're a plumber, I'm just going to call that your specialist skill. If you're a trainer, I'm just going to call that your specialist skill. But see, that won't be enough to get you to the dreams that you might be having. So you've got to develop this other skill set, this other ability. And it's got something to do with business. It's got something to do with technology. It's got something to do with digital or something or others. And it's got something to do with being much more entrepreneurial than basically just selling your time and labor for money. And here's a quote, again, it's by Toffler: to survive, to avert what we have termed future shock, the individual must become infinitely more adaptable and capable than any before. We must search out totally new ways to anchor ourselves, for all the old roots, religions, nations, communities, family, or professions are now shaking under the hurricane impact of the accelerating thrust. It's no longer resources that limit decisions. It's decisions that now makes the resources. In other words, once you've dug all the resources out of the ground, or you've got the whatever they are, we're coming to an end. We're coming to peak experiences of those. So basically, it's resources. The old way is resources limit decisions. But in this new world of knowledge-driven entrepreneurialism, it's your decisions that make resources, because the resources are now ideas that can be digitized and leveraged, such as knowledge. It's inexhaustible. But if you're not getting access to better knowledge, you can't actually turn those decisions into saleable resources. So you've got to rely on the old industrialized processes, which are rapidly decaying. So the first and best investment that you'll ever make is in developing your knowledge and financial skills. If you don't invest in yourself, then what you end up doing is following conventional wisdom. And everything that you do under the term quote unquote investment will simply be gambling, because the old ways aren't working. They're rapidly decaying. So when you follow a wisdom based on convention, you end up with less time, you end up with less freedom, you end up with less choice. You start experiencing more debt, you start experiencing greater insecurity, along with increased worry and stress. Now, some of you may be in that position now because you've just been following a wisdom convention. Not your fault, and that's what everybody is doing. But now you're on calls like this. Now you're kind of sort of getting exposure to people like Keegan. Now you're getting exposure to concepts like uncommon success. And all of those changes that will happen in that space of new knowledge will give you greater access to possibilities, as long as you detach from the wisdom of convention. So by developing your knowledge and your financial skills, you increase your personal power, firstly, to protect what you've got, and secondly, to improve your ability to create better decisions. And of course, if you can create better decisions, you're going to create better future-based outcomes. But if you're just following old traditional ways, and if people are pressuring you to follow those old traditional ways, you've really got to sit back and say, well, is this really going to get me to where I want to get to? Or, are there alternatives? Now, cycles such as the Industrial Revolution, steam engines and railways, steel and electricity, oil and transport, microprocessors and computers, telecommunications, the internet, new technology and knowledge, they basically have changed human cultures and experience all over the world. They've also driven groundbreaking changes in financial markets. Now we're just in one of those change cycles again. So that's why we can see that most things are based on chaos. But on the other side of chaos is opportunity. So if you're focused on chaos, you'll only see it. If you're focused on opportunity, you might not see it in the initial stages, but somebody can teach you how to see and think about things differently. So those who took advantage of change gained wealth and freedom in all of the other change cycles. Those who failed to shift their thinking, their beliefs, their behaviors, they simply live lives of hardship, financial underperformance, compounding debt, and inner despair. And like 150 years ago, David Henry Thoreau said, most men live lives of quiet desperation, and they go to their grave with their songs still in them. Well, that's what he was talking about. Always had these great ideas, but they followed conventional wisdom. So they were never able to develop their dreams. Change favors the brave and those who have flexibility. Underline, circle, highlight that word, flexibility. Because flexibility gives you the ability to adapt, but it disadvantages those people who are driven by fear. It disadvantages those people who are driven by inflexibility, or they want to hold on to their model of the world. They want to hold on to their beliefs. It disadvantages those people who are confused. What's the state of confusion? Well, confusion is the stage before you have a breakthrough. But if you don't learn new knowledge, you never get the breakthrough. So you actually always stay at confusion. But confusion is the necessary stage before a breakthrough. So if you are at confusion, congratulations. It might sound counterintuitive, but if you're confused, you're at a perfect place, because the next step is breakthrough. if you do something. Otherwise, you stay in that world of confusion, and that leads to fixed minds, and it leads to resistance, and it leads to things like skepticism. And people are always skeptical. That's fine. I don't say anything about people who are skeptics because I can't help them, and nor can they help themselves. But people who have flexibility and have the courage of moving forward, that's where we really do well and work well together. So we live in a time where the need for financial security, independence, and freedom have exponentially increased. Yet so very few have ever really followed the knowledge rabbit, I call, the knowledge rabbit down the increasing opportunities to a completely different experience. So if you think about, very few people have actually done anything about learning the necessary skills to have this thing called financial freedom or financial security or financial independence, whichever way you want to language it. And again, look, I'm just talking about financial stuff here. If you want to cross that out and talk about relationship stuff, well, it's the same deal. It's the same deal. If you want to cross that out and talk about wellness stuff, it's the same deal. You're going to be advantaged by more knowledge and disadvantaged by conventional knowledge. So most people have been convinced to allow chance or luck or quote unquote the system or quote unquote experts to take care of their financial destiny. And the more you stick to old knowledge and beliefs, the more vulnerable you are to your own mind cage. And that's what I mean when I hear the word mindset. Mind is the activity of brain, and set is something that's fixed in place. So whenever I hear about people talking about mindset, I think about, they're talking about a mind cage, and they just don't know, change your mindset. Well, how can you change your mind cage? You don't want mindset, you want mind flexibility, of course, because mind flexibility gives you a chance and an opportunity to escape your own mind cage. Old thinking patterns won't work because old thinking models cannot protect you from what's coming. And so the problem really is with old paradigms. And old paradigms simply mean the way that you think about things, and the way that you think about things is generally fixed. And that's what we call a mindset. It's the way that people think about what they think about. Now, to think about it differently, you need flexibility. You don't need stuckness. You don't need old beliefs. You don't need skepticism. You don't need any of that. You need flexibility of thought. And to get that, you need to be exposed to other people who think about things differently than the way that the conventional model of the world thinks about things. So a mind driven by something like the fear of failure, or the fear of loss, or the fear of missing out, is a mind that acts from within a cage. Now, relative to wealth and freedom, mind cages place you in vulnerable positions, which conventional wisdom cannot free you from. Conventional wisdom can only place you in those mind cages because it serves the social engineers. Mind cages keep you hostage to your current results. And so whatever results that you're getting, they weren't created by themselves. Now, you either did it by deliberate design, or somebody else was actually guiding you to those results. And if you didn't design your way in, well, you obviously can't design your way out. But with learning and with skill development, you can design your way out. And that's my wish to every one of you. So unless you change the way that you think about money, there's nothing you can do other than to continue experiencing the results you're getting now. How is it possible to experience anything else? So you really got to start to understand this idea about mind cages and mind flexibility. So financial freedom requires more knowledge and flexibility of mind than at any other time in history. And so everything must be based on the flexibility of strategies. Not necessarily the mediums, but the strategies, so that you can continually reassess and take advantage of changing market conditions, both up and down. Now, literally, the cost of not doing that is like what this guy is sawing off his own limb, which is going to obviously cause a disaster. So the cost of complacency and the costs of mistakes and the costs of inaction have the potential to harm in more ways than they ever have over past decades. And I want you to really think about the cost of inaction or the cost of gambling or the cost of mistakes. If you think about moving forward, and if you think about the age that you are now, most people won't have enough time to rebuild from mistakes. They won't have enough time to rebuild from the bottom of the next decline, which some reputable forecasters suggest has the potential to last over a decade. So basically, unless you actually know how to take advantage of decline, you'll be in a lost position. And you can't really recover. You might not have enough time. If you're young, well, certainly you might have enough time to experience another couple of cycles. But just got to think about those sorts of things. So if you think about your ability to gain new knowledge, and here we're just looking at a chart, and it's just a chart of price movements. But you can see here that, look, something was bubbling along. Everybody's kind of sort of feeling, yeah, okay, so basically nothing much happening in the price. And then here, something happened, okay? So you're going to say, well, what happened there to change the direction of that price? You know, what actually happened? Here it was going up relative to where it has been. Something happened, and then the price, the bottom fell out. And then it started to change here. So basically something happened here, and it sent the prices on this long-term upward trend. And basically got up to there, and look, it got to the top here, but look at how sharp the fall is. Look at how sharp the increase is. Okay, so something happened here. You've got to say, well, if something happened here, if something happened here, can you learn that? Yeah, sure. Could have you been on the lookout? Yeah, absolutely sure. But something happened here to basically send the price rocketing down to here, and now it's just going through another sideways pattern, which is what it did over here. Now, this is the price of oil. So let's look at what could, if you were thinking about these things, if you were thinking about, okay, so if there's an opportunity for me to take advantage of, could I have taken advantage just by being more mindful of what's actually happening in the news, in current basically things that are happening around the world? Well, here we are at the beginning of 2020. Well, what happened? Well, lo and behold, the whole world went into shutdown mode because of a wellness challenge. Well, shutdown mode means, most people aren't going to drive cars because they're going to be locked in. It means it's going to be lower demand, which means prices are going to fall. Well, if you would have known that, if you could afford projecting, it was easy to do it. It wasn't difficult by any stretch of imagination. Basically, it rocketed down. And then it started opening up again. Okay, so basically, we're going all the way up here. And, what was also happening here? Well, basically, round about here, there were all sorts of projections and issuances and laws passed in America to basically shut down oil pipelines, to shut down refineries and all of that sort of stuff. Well, now we're going to cause a scarcity, aren't we? So anything that's scarce, there's going to be too many dollars chasing too fewer things, so the price is naturally going to basically increase. And now look what happens. Around about March of this year, sorry. Wow, didn't somebody get into confluffle with what's happening in Russia and what their politics and stuff are doing? Well, let's go and cause all sorts of sanctions. Let's go and shut down bank accounts. Let's go and sanctions on everything. Well, you could have bet your bottom dollar that the price is going to fall over, and now it's just going in. So once you've actually tuned in, and once you can start to see things through a different set of eyes, you can start seeing opportunities all over the place. So if you think about preparing and thriving over the next decade, means developing skills to look for event catalysts. And those event catalysts will drive new trends, and they will drive new cycles. Now, an event catalyst might have been somebody issuing a new set of policies. An event catalyst might be a complete turn from in the form of politics. An event catalyst might be technical innovation, geopolitical changes, policy reforms. Those sorts of things impact cycles and markets in various places. You can think about, here in autumn in 2020 in the USA, this is what $1,000 would have bought you in terms of timber. Basically, just under a year later, that same $1,000 could only buy you this much timber. So if you were tuned into that, you could have just gone and bought lots and lots and lots of timber, waited a year, and basically made you a small fortune. Not difficult to do at all. It's just that people don't think like that because they're so locked into conventional ideas. Look at this one. Something happened. It was a geopolitical financial event. Something happened in a country where it took this amount of money to buy this amount of meat. Now, we can't even fathom this, but some say that we're quite well on the way. We can see the same thing happening in Weimar, Germany. We can see the same thing happening in Zimbabwe. We can see the same thing happening in Argentina. We can see it in Venezuela, all over the place. So these are opportunities for you to tap into if you can actually read the signs and you're flexible enough to take advantage of them. All of these are just possibilities. So what are your strategies for 2022 and beyond? Now, remember, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This is just purely educational. It's just giving you ways to think about what it is that you think about a little bit differently. Well, we know that in order to have more freedom, you've got to have less debt. So basically, you might think about, okay, I need to decrease debt. Well, that's okay. What else do I need to do? And what else do I need to think about? Well, you've certainly got to decrease risk. So what do I mean by risk? And so whenever I ask people, what do you mean by risk? They say, oh, it's about losing money. Well, for me, that's just not good enough. So my definition of risk, and I read and read books and books of it. And if you really want to do this research and read it, there's a book called Against the Gods, which is Bernstein, I think, is the author. And basically, it's the history of risk and how, financial people thought about risk. I mean, if you're back in the 1400s and you've got lots and lots and you're a merchant, how do you decide to stack this boat full of these goods and send it halfway around the world where you didn't even understand where that halfway around the world was and whether or not your actual ship would come back or whether the pirates would get it or whatever? How did you actually make that decision? So basically that book is the whole history of that. Now, once I understood it, once I understood the paper that Harry Markowitz wrote about how you define risk, he won a Nobel Prize for that. I think it was in the 90s somewhere. Once I actually understood it, it didn't actually mean anything for me because I'm a financial guru or financial industry or anything like that. So I had to develop my own definition of risk. And for me, it's in any given context, in any given situation, risk is my probabilities of making ineffective choices. So risk means for me, in any given context or any given situation, my probabilities of making ineffective choices. Now, if I don't have any experience in any given context, then my probabilities of making ineffective choices are going to be high. Well, what I want to do is decrease risk. Well, how do I decrease risk in any given context? I have to increase my knowledge and I have to increase my skills in that context. And if I increase my knowledge and I increase my skills, I'm going to decrease my risk of making ineffective decisions. So I just wanted to share that one with you. And the fourth one, you've got to get advantage. You've got to get in, you've got to get access to more money. Because if you want more lifestyle, we buy that sort of stuff with money, but you've got to understand money in ways that you haven't understood it before. So you really literally got to increase your knowledge and your skills around making money so that you can decrease your risk, so that you can pay off debt, and so that you can increase the value of your discretionary income. Then you might say, okay, what one do I do first? Well, how do we answer that? Well, you've got to think about your situation, because basically your situations will be as different as you are different as individuals. So if you think about, well, okay, what does each of these activities depend on the most for you? Can you decrease your debt without actually increasing your money and skills? If the answer is no, then money and skills might be the first thing. Can you decrease your risk without increasing, can you increase the value? Well, you might be in a position, well, okay, the first thing I want to do is concentrate on increasing the value of your discretionary income. And if you have done that 30-day challenge, then it tells you how to do that. If you haven't, then I might get an opportunity to present that piece of content for you. But see, there's a little roadmap there for, well, you can now work your way through this. What do I need to do first to enable me to do the other things that I think are important? So basically, we've come to the end of this presentation. And really what I wanted to concentrate on is why an understanding of cycles is extremely important to the idea of having a lucrative future. Why job income is no longer enough if you wish to experience more independence and freedom within that future, and why a change in money thinking is absolutely critical to your future if you want greater independence and freedom in that future. So now I shall just hand it over to any questions that you might want to ask.
Yeah, hey Paul, my name's Daniel. I have a question about GDP and geographical locations.
G'day.
So you brought up a graph in the beginning showing the distribution of world GDPs by country, as percentages. And the implication of the technological trajectory that we're on currently, to me, says that it seems to actually not really matter too much from a financial perspective where you live, as long as you have an internet connection. If that is a relatively decent assumption that it doesn't matter where you live, what sorts of things should guide a person's decision to live in a particular country or location from, if we're ignoring political factors?
Great question. Now, of course, the answer is going to be different, for different people. But high on my absolute, if I have a priority list, high on my, in fact, I did recently make a move, but high on my priority list is safety. The next highest thing on, and these might be competing for their absolute position on the hierarchy, but it's freedom. And then we move into lifestyle, and then we move into all of the things that I need to be able to access to have the best experiences of that lifestyle. So, you can think about, okay, I can go and get lost in the middle of the Amazon, and basically I'm going to have freedom and independence and privacy and all that sort of stuff. But I might not get access. I might not have access to, let's say, modern medicine and things of that nature. Should I need it? And you've got families and things to think about. So there's a basic, list of priorities, and you've got to think about, okay, what would happen wherever you live? What would happen if there was destabilization? Are you under threat? What would happen if all of these things? So you're just going to make a decision. Okay, so I might move to something that's a little bit more free. I might develop skills that allow me to use technology to develop income. And basically, the internet is one of those technologies. And then you think, okay, if I'm only looking after yourself, well, some concerns may not be that important if you've got a family to think about, or other concerns are going to be that much more important. But basically, anything that really supports a heightened quality of lifestyle and is not going to threaten that higher quality of lifestyle. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
And all you do is, you create a list depending on who you are and how you think about it. But certainly, my move was certainly by design. I wanted to move away from what I was doing. I wanted greater independence. I wanted land. I wanted water. I wanted food. I wanted independence. I wanted security. All of those sorts of things. So I had to look and look and look and look and look, and then I found it.
Hey, Paul, I've got a question about self-limiting beliefs. And
hey, Jamie.
Hey, Paul. And I've been looking into it and feeling into it, and the topic of language around how much ownership I'm taking over myself and my life, and language being a tool to realize whether I'm giving that ownership and that control of my life away. Is that a tool that you would recommend? Is it too analytical instead of coming from the body? What's your thoughts around that?
Look, that's a great question, Jamie. And the straight answer is yes, language is absolutely critical. It's absolutely central. The trouble is that, well, if we think about how many words are there, if we just use English for the moment, okay, and it's the same thing in anybody's language. It doesn't really matter. So okay, let me back up a little bit. Basically, if you were born to parents who lived in the Kalahari Desert, you wouldn't be driving around in this car now. Okay, and so the only language you would learn is the language of your parents and basically those people, that culture around you. And the only reason why you would learn that language is because they want you to be a good representative of their culture. So you can actually go around the world and you can learn anything about science, the universe, astrology, but you're not going to learn it there. Okay, now most people don't move out of their cultural things, so they only learn the language of their culture. And it's designed to limit itself to having you being a good representative or a good servant of that culture. So basically every culture around the world does the same thing. You could potentially be anything, but you're not going to be as long as you live in this culture. Now, once you understand that, now let's just look at the English language, for example. It's been reported that a few years ago, English became the first language with over 1 million words in it. Okay, so how many of those 1 million words do you actually know? How many of those 1 million words have you got in your vocab? Now, we can argue that you need at least 500 words of vocab to at least even attempt to live an independent lifestyle. If you don't have 500 words of vocab, you will be in custodial care of some description. So for example, children don't actually have 500 words of vocab, so they can't express themselves in concepts, conceptual abilities or abstract abilities. It's pretty much functional black and white stuff. People who are suffering traumas, if they don't have 500 words of vocab, people with dementia, if they don't have 500 words, they can't actually operate. So they've been in some form of custodial care. Okay, so what does schooling do? What does the whole sort of social movement do? Well, they teach you enough language for you to do what they want you to do, which is spend years in service to them, because all cultures do it. Okay, now the average vocab of an adult, and I'm not really smicked up on this, but I don't think it's more than 2,000 or 3,000 words. So now it's 2,000 or 6,000 words that you all use in common without actually even questioning what the word means. So I don't know anybody, or very few people, that actually understand what the word risk is. They use the word, but they don't actually say, well, what does it mean? And so what does mindset mean? They don't actually say, well, where did mind come from? Why did they put the word set there? And everybody's using it as though they're an authority, but they don't actually question it. Why is often, if you share information with somebody, why is often the first word that comes out of their mouth is, yeah, but? Well, what does it mean? Well, if they say, yeah, but, they haven't listened to what you've just said. They've just been working out their response. And yeah, but, or but, is I disagree with you. They're not consciously doing it. It's just habit forming. But as soon as you learn somebody, essentially listen to people using the word right and wrong. Well, where's that? Well, it locks them into a certain paradigm that wasn't available 10,000 years ago. That paradigm has only been available for 5,000 years. The concept of right and wrong has only been available for 5,000 years. Okay, so if it's only been available for 5,000 years, we didn't actually need it. Language itself has been around for a few tens of thousands of years. It hasn't been around that long. But even if somebody's using the word language and wrong, they're actually locating themselves within a paradigm, but they don't actually understand that they're doing it. And so your language informs your neural chemistry, and your neurochemistry informs your behavior. And if there's no programs in there for expansion, you can't use them. And so language keeps you trapped in the model that you're following, and it puts limits on your beliefs. That's why they call them limiting beliefs. The easiest thing would be say, well, get rid of it, get a new one. But you can't do it because you're driven by your chemistry and by your subconscious programs. So we've got to put a new program in there to give you, and that really does depend on language to a large extent. It depends on a few other things, but language is so critical. Generally, if you're, and you'll ask, even a conversation with Keegan, when I started working, I'm a bit gentle to begin with, but then I start picking up language patterns and literally, putting a different slant on that. And anybody that's worked in EMC will say the same thing. It doesn't stop you doing them. It's just hard to break the habit. But when you break the habit, expansion happens.
And is language, like just focusing on it and awakening yourself up and holding yourself to that in the language, the best kind of, well, not the best, is it still a good lens to look at it in the real time?
Listen to your words, listen to your language.
Yeah.
The best and good, what's the opposite of good? Bad. What's the opposite of best? Words? Well, see how just even in that concept, in that sort of, you're voicing your mind, you can see how many limitations there are already.
Yeah, I see.
So I'm not picking on you, or at least I don't intend to pick on you, but it's so critical, and yet it's just automatic pilot, and we don't realize we're saying it because it makes perfect sense in a conventional wisdom way, but that makes no sense at all in an uncommon sense way, and you've got to get into the uncommon to experience the uncommon.
And is the idea there that I'm referring to an absolution of a third party that is like, how can we determine what good is? Good is just subjective. Is that what the limitation comes from?
Well, so let me ask you this question. Do you believe people can have differing opinions on something and both be right?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever had an argument with somebody?
Yes.
So if you truly believe that people can have differing opinions and both be right, why were you arguing?
Because a lack of communication and ownership.
Well, it might even be more deeper than that. In order for you to be right, in order for you to be able to experience your right, you actually have to make the other side wrong. Because right can't exist in the absence of its opposite. So even though you might intellectually believe that you can both be right, you don't behave that way in the world. You behave that way according to your model of the world. And your model of the world is only producing the results you're doing now. And you argue your case. In other words, you defend it by making the other side wrong. Because you don't have to be right. You can just say, hey, that's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that anymore. You don't actually have to voice your concern. You don't have to voice anything unless you want to arm wrestle them through argument. And to do that requires greater flexibility. It's just interesting. It's not really the right model. It's just interesting. It's not something that I would choose. It's not something I would find beneficial, but it's interesting. But in the moment you start to argue your case, then you're locked into this right, wrong, good, bad. dichotomy. And that's restrictive and constrictive. It's not actually freeing and expansive.
I see. Thank you, Paul.
My pleasure.
Paul?
Hey, g'day, Joe.
Hey, how you doing? I've got a question. I want to take you back to what you were saying before about, okay, so, and I can see this, the cycle that we're in at the moment, and it is, this change could be going on for quite some time. So I'm probably one of the oldest on the call today, and I'm sitting here at 55. So
you're a young pup, Joe. You're a young pup.
You don't, yeah, I know that you don't give financial advice, but what are your thoughts to somebody who has been living under conventional wisdom and has traditional assets and traditional equity, but not much else at the age of 55 in 2022?
Look, I say, great starting point. Absolutely fantastic starting point. Because you're way ahead of most people.
Yeah.
You're way ahead of, I don't know, probably about 7 billion people on the planet. And then you say, okay, yep, that's just been a product of my generational thing. It's just been a product of my environment. And then you say, okay, if I were to create my ideal lifestyle in my head, what would you actually need in order to achieve it? Okay, now, if you say, oh, actually, I'd need more cash flow. If that's the determination, then fine. Your next step is, now, how do I start thinking about more cash flow in terms that I actually am not thinking about it just yet? Now, I just gave you a way to make $1 million. Just take this information, sell it for $1, sell it $1 million times. Why not? You have my complete commission, whatever that means. And now I'm not going to come and hunt you for a commission or a spotter's fee or anything like that. But does it make sense? If you say the information I've just shared with you is worth $1. Now, like I said, the only reason why you couldn't do it is because you don't know how. Well, you can learn that. And the only reason why you wouldn't do it is because there's some internal blockage going on.
So you wouldn't change the model of where, you know, say we've got equity and debt in equal proportion.
It doesn't matter. It's the same answer that I gave. What are your skills? So if you have equity, let's say that you've got two forms of debt. Okay, so one form of debt is, let's say, a mortgage. Well, you now know how much that money costs you. Okay, so let's say it just cost you 5%. Now, another form of debt might be a credit card. Well, that might cost you 18%.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were taking $1 and putting it into your credit card and lowering that, you're being advantaged by 18% on the value of that $1.
Yeah.
If you take that and put it into your mortgage, then you're being advantaged to a lesser extent. You're still being advantaged. Is that okay?
Yep.
Now, it makes perfect sense to be advantaged by 18% rather than 5% or 3% or whatever. Perfect sense.
Right.
But then you start to say, well, is there anything that's actually faster than that? Well, now I've got to do my research, don't I? So, emerging technologies, what's around there? Let's just do our research. Don't listen to, the spruikers and just look, read charts, because they tell you what's happening. But if you don't know how to interpret them, well, fine, you can't read the evidence in the chart. So then you say, on average, what's been the return of this over the past decade? On average, what's been the return of this over the past decade? On average, what's been the return of this over the past decade?
Yeah.
Now, you can do that research, and then you can make better decisions. Okay, this one's traveling at 18%, it's called a credit card. This one's traveling at 5%, it's called a mortgage. This one's traveling at 100%, it's called, ABC, whatever. This one's traveling at an annualized compound rate of 100. Now, if it's traveling at 7%, you'll double your money in 7 years. Okay, if it's traveling at 100% or more than 100%, you double your money in less than a year. Okay, so but again, it's like it's about thinking about things differently. So you're still thinking about assets and money and debt and all of those sorts of things, but you're thinking about them differently. And then once you start to understand that you can think about them differently, now it's dependent on what skills you're prepared to learn.
Yeah.
So for example, I could buy a house, you know, with cash, and that might double. Well, it won't double every 7 years. It doesn't matter what the commentators say, because what you've got to do is work out well, how much costs are in that business. Okay. So of course there's insurance, and of course there's maintenance, and of course there's rates, and of course there's stamp duties, and of course there's various taxes and all that sort of stuff. So that's a cost to the business. Okay, it might give me shelter, but basically as a business, it's a poor performing business because it doesn't give me any money. So I've got to wait years and years and years and years and years and years and years. Well, you know, the purchasing power of that money is going down for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. Okay, so what would happen if I just had an idea? I could teach people something to do something. And believe me, you've got so much knowledge, you just can't think about trying to teach it to somebody else that doesn't have that knowledge. But there's people that are making millions of dollars on YouTube. They run YouTube channels that teach people how to tie bow ties, because there's billions of people that don't know how to tie a tie, a collar tie, or a bow tie. There's a guy making millions of dollars teaching people how to tie shoelaces. You wouldn't think for a moment that you could actually make a business teaching people how to tie shoelaces. But for people who don't know how to tie shoelaces, you've got valuable knowledge. Okay, whenever you want to do a recipe, if you don't know how to do a recipe, well, one of the first things you do is you go to the internet. Well, how do I get a better sponge cake? Or how do I do weaving? Well, somebody are teaching that stuff, and they've generally got a subscription service and blah, 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 blah. So we've just got to think about it differently. So it's not whether traditional assets are good, bad, right, or wrong. They have their place. But what do you need? And by, you know, you say 55, well, that's fine. I was dead flat broke at 40 and multimillionaire by 44.
I think what I probably meant was more, no, because I know that I've got value in what I sell, and I'm an entrepreneur. And what I think I was more thinking about, like, what can I do to maximize how I create that generational wealth, you know, in the investments that I make, etc. You know, what do, you know, I do have this equity. What do I do? You know, the traditional method in the modern world is buy more property or leverage yourself and buy.
Well,
you know,
you might think that, but I'm going to say to you that that's the old world. It's not the modern world.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I meant yes, I meant conventional was the old world.
Okay.
So
now, see, I can't tell you what to do.
No.
But I have told you what to do.
Yeah.
The best investment, go back and watch this replay. The best investment will be in your acquisition of new knowledge and convert that new knowledge into skills. When you do that, you won't be asking me that question. Until you do that, you are going to ask me that question every single day. And even at the beginning of this call, and I'm not going to pick on you, it might feel like I'm going to pick on you. At the beginning of this call, I said, don't ask me the how question. Ask me how I can think about this thing differently. That would be the better question. And the way that you can think about it is, well, okay, if I can generate money at a higher rate than the 3% or the 5% or the 18%, doesn't actually lead the way forward. Oh, okay, I've just got to go and learn a new skill. No, I don't know what to do yet until you actually do the learning. So the first thing that you need access to is information relative to the outcome that you want. That's step number one. And I will tell you this same model over and over and over again until it basically sinks in. So step number one in your model for advancement, let's say, or your model for high achievement. Step number one is get more information relative to the outcome that you want. If you want to be a multimillionaire, well, first up, more information, please. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Step number two, apply that information. Because until you apply it, you don't change behavior. You're only doing things on an intellectual basis. Now, I'm not saying to apply it whole as bolus. I'm saying put your toes in. Get a couple of Satoshis was, I think, the example I used yesterday. Okay. Now, as soon as you apply that information, you get the third step automatically, and that's called a result. And here's the problem. If you are going to... sorry?
You cut out. I just said the third. It said you just said here's the third. And then I missed
the third thing is what you get automatically is called a result. As soon as you do steps 1 and 2, as soon as you apply it, you're going to get a result, aren't you?
Yeah.
So that's step number 3, get a result. Now, here's the problem. Most people don't get the result that they're actually looking for. They get something less than that. And they generally call it failure. And so if you call it failure, then you generally won't actually try and do this again. But see, I don't believe, at least in my model of the world, I don't believe that you can call a result failure, because a result happens as an impact of you doing something. You did something to get the result. So in you doing something, that's an actual forward movement, isn't it? So that's actually a success, because you actually had to do something to cause the result. So let's not use old, outdated wisdom, which is what the conventional wisdom does. Well, that's not right, it's failure. Well, that's good, bad. And it just locks you into that, well, I don't want to, it's too risky, I feel uncomfortable, blah, blah. So step number 4 says, and here is the most critical step of that 5-step model. Step number 4 says, you have to develop more effective and efficient feedback criteria in order to assess the result. Because if you're putting it through old feedback mechanisms, it'll call it failure. It won't actually call it a success. But it has to be a success because you did something to achieve it. That's successful in my book. Now, step number 5 is, according to your new feedback criteria, what adjustments do you need to make in order to improve the result? Well, you can only make adjustments to step number 1 or step number 2 or both. And the more you cycle through those 5 stages, the more expansion you will experience.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's gold right there.
Thank you. Go and sell that for $1.
Yeah. Several times.
Question, if I may.
Exactly. That's the second million.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
My pleasure.
Hello, Paul. I have a question, if I may.
Hey, g'day. Giovanni, is it?
Yes, sir. Good evening here in California. Grateful to be here. Thank you for your presentation. Regarding this new learning, I had an inquiry. I'm pondering rebuilding a fresh mental model, breaking out of a mind cage, and I hope this is going to resonate with the movers out there. Like thinking of unlearning cognitive skills relative to motor skills, for example. How would you apply stretches for mental flexibility, like exercises for establishing new ways of thinking, if you will?
Great question. Like it all starts from, if you think about that question, how would you do mental stretching? Okay, now, if you think about what has the greatest impact on your thinking system now?
My experience, okay. I imagine?
No, the people around you.
Okay.
The society, the community, the people around you, okay? They have the greatest impact on the way that you exercise your mind. What would happen if you started surrounding yourself with geniuses? What would happen to your thinking processes?
I would begin to resonate on a similar frequency. Thus,
well, you wouldn't initially, because you wouldn't even know what they were saying.
Okay.
Because they're geniuses. They would just stretch your mind so far.
Okay.
Until you developed an understanding and an appreciation of some of the concepts and some of the abstracts that they were actually talking about. Is that fair? So, for example, if you're in a gym, and I mean no disrespect whatsoever, but if you're in a gym and you go to the gym and the average age of everybody in that gym is 90, are you going to be stretched by their ability to perform activities or lift weights or do whatever? No. Okay. Now, what would happen if you went to a gym and everybody in that gym was an Olympic athlete? Are you going to be stretched by what they can do versus what you can do?
Yes, certainly.
So the number one determinant is your current environment. So in other words, it's epigenetic. So for example, what's your first language?
English.
Okay, you've got a wonderful accent there.
Oh, thank you.
Do you speak French?
No, my brother actually lived in France, but I speak a little Spanish.
Do you speak French?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now, what would happen? What would happen if you went and lived in France, in the middle of Paris, for a year, and nobody would speak English to you? You're going to be stretched to learn a new language, aren't you?
Oui. Yes.
Because the environment demands it of you.
Right.
So if you want mind exercises, work with me for a year. If you want to stretch your mind, ask the people who have done the EMC program before you. Ask them, what's happened to me? Ask Keegan. Okay? Because basically, change is all about growth, and growth is all about stretching. And Keegan might share, or others might share, the concept of the free ride bias. But again, so it's just like if you think you're going to stretch your mind, it's the same 5-step model. More information relative to the outcome that you want, apply that learning, get a result, develop better feedback or analytic criteria, analysis criteria based on that result, and then step 5, make adjustments somewhere in some shape or form. But you're not going to do it unless you start becoming a serious student of the outcome that you want by reading books. That's what I did. I just started off reading everybody's books. I sat in libraries because I couldn't afford to buy the books. Now, I did this before the internet. Now you can just do it on the internet. So what's your profession or your career path? What do you do?
Well, professionally, I work in gardens, in growing environments, and creatively, I've recently founded a project with my brother, a resource providing information inspired by Uncom called Accordance with Nature on Water. So
yeah, great. Now,
new venture.
What are you going to do to stretch your understanding of that? What are you going to do to basically grow your model of the world so that you can reach more people to share your experiences with? Well, it all starts with learning. More information relative to the outcome that you want.
Right.
If you want to grow your customer base from 10 to 100, if you want to grow your customer base from 100 to 1,000, if you want to grow your customer base from 1,000 to 100,000, if you want to grow your customer base from 100,000 to 1 million, they're all growth processes, aren't they? It's like, the older you get, the taller you get. And we used to mark how high we were, as young kids on the door somewhere. But it's the same 5-step process. More information relative to the outcome that you want, but you've got to find yourself, you've got to locate environments that will stretch you. It's either intellectually, it's physically, it's mentally, it's spiritually, it's financially. Because if they don't, then you're just going to be in the same conditioning boat as the conventional wisdom space.
Mm. Understood. Beautifully said. Thank you very much, Paul.
My pleasure. Gee, you're all letting me off lightly.
There is a certain degree of shell shock that some people might be experiencing in the most positive way. It's probably not the right word, but there's growth already that happens, right? When you're hearing this stuff, when you're watching these presentations, it's like, taking in new knowledge through the fire hose in a way.
Well, there you go. So if there's no more questions, I might take my lead, if that's okay.
I've got one more if you've got time, Paul.
Sure.
So just on the same topic of self-limiting beliefs, with the psychology yourselves and different energetic ways that we can move through the world as we try to gain better awareness of those energies, is each one of those energies what creates the beliefs and the reactive state of unconscious kind of moving in the world?
That's a really interesting question. So it's really interesting that if you just sort of take your eyes, for example, what our eyes see is not what our brain sees. So our eye is just a basic camera, okay? And it's actually a poor quality camera. It actually doesn't, it's really grainy. If you just took your eyeball out, and if you could do that, and turn in the camera and just took a camera shot, and there would be very little detail, very little outline, lots of grainy images, and most of it would be black and white. So how come we see color? How come we can even think in color when there's no light in our brains? Okay, now, funny thing is, you've got neuro pathways from your eyeball to your brain. Would that be a reasonable comment? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've got 10 times the bandwidth from your brain to your eyeball as you do from your eyeball to your brain. Mm. So what does that tell you? It tells you that most of the activity is me creating meaning in the external world in order for my brain to make sense of it. It's not the external world creating the meaning. So if you've got 10 times the bandwidth going from the brain to the eye, so from the eye to the brain, it tells you something, it gives you a clue. So it's not your beliefs that are determining you, it's you determining your beliefs, which then determine you. Now, have you got choice?
Yes.
Now, if you think about energy, it's not the energy that makes you, it's you that makes the energy. Because the way that you think about things can either make you feel fear, it can make you feel anger, it can make you feel frustration, it can make you feel happy, it can make you feel love, it can make you feel basically anything, any emotion. It can make you feel satisfied. But who's creating the meaning? Does the ice cream create the meaning of you feeling satisfied, or do you create the meaning of eating the ice cream and now I feel satisfied? Now, most meaning is created unconsciously because you don't actually understand how the brain works. You don't understand how neurochemistry works. See, like if you understand that energy moves around just your body in two different forms. One form is electricity. Okay, so electricity is what, goes along a nerve. But see, all our nerves are not connected to every other nerve. All our neurons are not connected to every other neuron. So there's spaces in between. Well, electricity doesn't jump the gap. like a, it might do in a spark plug or something like that. It converts itself into chemistry, and the chemistry is sprayed across the gap. So therefore, there's some repositories of chemistry, and then there's some receptors. Well, it's the energy that determines what particular chemical gets sprayed across the gap and then what gets accepted. And the experience that you had is unconsciously what you're choosing without really being aware of it. Now, you can have a fear experience, but you didn't think that fear experience. It's the outside caused the impact, but it's your choice to go along with it, to confirm it. So, you might be really, laying in the sunshine now, and, your best mate comes around the corner and yells, and you jump 10 feet out of your chair. Well, but if you carry on with it and start criticizing your mate and start, blowing them off and all of that sort of stuff, then that's you now doing the conscious choosing or the unconscious choosing. It's your fault position. So we have we have a greater impact. We have the potential to have a greater impact on our environment than our environment does on us, except most people live unconsciously, so their environment creates them rather than them creating their environment. But if you just know that, hang on, why would there be 10 times the bandwidth? There's actually more neurons going from the heart to the brain than there is from the brain to the heart. Why would that be? There's more neurons in the heart than there is actually in the brain. Why would that be? The energy field of your heart is 10 times the power of the energy field of your brain. Like the energy torus of your heart is 10 times more powerful than the energy field of your brain. We feel each other long before we think each other.
And so that brings me to a question of, if we clear out the language patterns that are limiting ourselves, do we fight against?
We don't have to clear them out, because you can't. You can't fix a program that is responsible for something that's not happening. Let that sink in. You can't fix a program that is responsible for what's not happening.
Because we created it.
Because we created it.
So
what you can do is develop a new program that is responsible for potentially exciting this new experience. And that's where skill development takes place. And unfortunately, it's an uncomfortable thing to begin with, because your mind doesn't recognize it. So anything your mind doesn't recognize is going to be felt as discomfort, because discomfort is a survival mechanism. And so you've got to be able to overcome the discomfort until your reward neurons, your dopamine neurons, learn to reward you for the new behavior. And unfortunately, that's a bigger lag time than most people are prepared to take. But anybody who has ever achieved greatness has gone through that lag period.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense to me now. Thanks, Paul.
Good on you. Okay, I really...
Thanks so much, Paul.
I really shudder at the idea of silent radio, so if there's no more questions, I shall... but look, have fun. It's a wonderful journey that you're on, and all you've got to do is basically seize the opportunities which way you want to experience them. So I hope our journeys cross at some point. Until then, we'll see you later. Bye.